Hey everyone, what's up? This is Uri for Upswing Poker, and in this video I'm going to talk about how you can adjust to a player who c-bets too much on the flop. And don't worry, this is not going to be the trivial adjustment of raise him and don't fold as much as you normally would. I wouldn't bother making a video if that were what we're going to be talking about. We talked about how you can adjust pre-flop to an opponent who's opening too wide. By looking through a hand of high stakes poker. And here we're going to keep rolling and go over the flop. And I want you guys to be in the mode whenever you're playing and as you're watching this hand of kind of a detective or a scientist gathering information and forming a theory. We can never really know exactly how our opponent plays, but every time we see him make a decision, we get an additional puzzle piece. And the more puzzle pieces we have, the more conclusions we can reach, the more confident we can be about them, and the bigger and more profitable exploits we can make.
I guess he's cold and he's covered up his shirt with a jacket.
All spades on the flop.
Doyle's got a pair of nines, make a straight flush with the seven of spades. Holman's got an open-end straight draw with the jack of spades, and Daniel bets with a pair of sixes.
He bets 1,500.
Now I'm gonna pause, talk about this c-bet. Generally in this kind of situation, the hijack is rarely, if ever, supposed to bet with any hand, and certainly not this hand. And it's important when you're, gathering information to have this context. So in a way, in order to exploit someone, you do need to know how to play correctly. Now the way ranges are configured generally is that cold calling ranges, and in this instance the button has a cold calling range, are more suited card and pocket pair and middle card heavy than the original raiser's range. Now this is due to not having, whether it's aces, kings, queens, ace king offsuit, ace queen offsuit, as often, or the bottom offsuit hands like king jack offsuit, queen jack offsuit. And here I'm talking about hands not necessarily the ranges played in this high stakes poker hand, but more the ranges you would generally play with. So for this reason, this type of board favors the cold caller. And even if there were only two players, the hijack should rarely, if ever, be c-betting anything. He's kind of at a disadvantage, and a c-bet here would be similar to a donk bet in a different situation. Now the fact that this is three-way only exacerbates, hope I'm pronouncing that word correctly, forgive me if I'm not, only makes the problem larger because you have even less of an edge to push. So generally a spot in which you should be betting very rarely and not with this type of hand. But now we're in the business of information gathering, so we're just treating this as a puzzle piece. And what I want to mention is kind of, aside from this hand, whenever you see somebody who's c-betting small in a situation, in any situation, the most common interpretation you can give this is this player thinks this is a situation in which he wants to c-bet a very wide range. Now, there are going to be exceptions, but this is, by far the most common is that if you see someone c-betting small in any situation, this is, he's c-betting a wide range there. And when we're, in the business of gathering information, we see the small bet, we see this in this situation. It's a big hint that the hijack in this hand likes c-betting small in a variety of situations, even if this is only one. And as we see him play more hands, we're quickly going to be able to discern whether or not this is true. But regardless if it is or it isn't, for Daniel Negreanu specifically, I'm sure there are lots of players in your games who do c-bet almost all the time in single raised pots, in 3-bet pots, in 3-way pots, way more than they should. And it's important, once you recognize that someone is doing this, to know what kind of adjustments we can make against him. So as I mentioned, there is kind of the trivial level 1 adjustment. And here I mean trivial in the context of, if you're a professional poker player who studied game theory, right? If you're not, this might not be trivial to you. But the level 1 adjustment you should be making is to raise the bets more than you normally would and to call the bets more than you normally would. right? These are your two weapons to fight back against the c-bet, raising and calling. And this is what most people would do facing this situation. But if you actually paid attention and you know your opponent is going to c-bet too much before the hand begins, you can actually start making adjustments before the flop, right? You can adjust your pre-flop range. So I want you guys to pause the video and try to think, what kind of adjustment would you make to your pre-flop strategy if you know that your opponent is always going to c-bet after you call and see the flop? Now this goes, of course, for single raise pots, for 3-bet pots, for 4-bet pots. You can make this adjustment in a variety of situations. And the more, the higher the stake you go up to, the more nuanced you have to be. But, there are a bunch of players who do this always in single raise pots, some 3-bet pots. You guys get the picture. Now, I'll try to explain the idea of the adjustment that you should do, kind of the logic behind it. Normally, when you have a good hand and someone opens, you have two options. You're not going to fold a good hand. You can either call or you can 3-bet. But what if you had a third option? Now, if your opponent tells you in advance, I'm always going to c-bet, you actually have the option between, 3-betting to 10 big blinds, for example, or calling the 2.5 big blinds. You get an in-between option. You get to call, see the flop. Your opponent promises you he's putting, anywhere between 1.5 to 2.5 big blinds in, and then you decide what your next course of action is going to be. So it's kind of an in-between 3-bet with a bonus, right? Compared to the normal call you would make. Now, kind of logically, thinking about the situation logically, if you imagine your range, and here, let's just think about the pocket pairs that we're 3-betting. So if we're 3-betting big blind versus button, we might 3-bet 9s through aces. And in this spot, a hand like 9s is kind of close between 3-betting and calling. But if your opponent gives you this bonus in between 3-bet option, 9s is certainly going to prefer that over 3-betting and certainly over calling. And even 10s might prefer that. And this is actually the adjustment that ends up happening. So when your opponent is opening and then c-betting too much, the main adjustment you want to make is to narrow your 3-bet range. You want to call more often to exploit the mistake that he's making by c-betting. And the hands that you add to your calling range are not weak hands. Like calling weak hands don't benefit from our opponent putting more money in. It's actually fairly bad for them. But you call kind of the bottom of your 3-bet range, and even a bit above that become calls. And this synergizes really well with raising the flop more and calling the flop more, because we're going to have a stronger range. We're going to have more overpairs, more sets, more top pair good kicker type hands. And then, naturally leads to us just raising bets more. Hope you guys understood the logic. Generally, the size of the adjustment is between 20 to 40% of your 3-betting range. So if we think of the aces through 9s example, 9s we'd certainly stop 3-betting, and depending on how too much and how big our opponent is c-betting, we might stop 3-betting 10s completely. In some extreme cases, you would start mixing even with a hand like jacks here. But I'm just using the hands to represent, how big of a deviation we make in our range. And you guys might say, okay, this sounds well and good, it makes sense, but can you prove it? Like, is it any more than conjecture? And the answer is, in the course that I'm making for Upswing, as I go over mistakes that people make, I actually know how to model these mistakes in a solver and then recalculate a new exploitative preflop strategy. I show you guys how to do that in short. That's, the course is not about how to do these things, but more about how to exploit mistakes. But I still take a little bit of time to show you guys how to build these simulations for yourselves. So this is something that you can actually verify with a solver, and you know, the result you get is very immediate, it's very dramatic, and it's exactly the way I described it. So to summarize the video, you want to pay attention, spot those guys who are c-betting too much, and you get to attack them in 3 ways. The first one starts pre-flop, and it's really important, and that's to slow play more pre-flop, especially the bottom of your 3-bet range. The second adjustment is going to be on the flop, and that's going to be to call a little bit more, but more importantly to raise the bets a lot, and pre-flop is going to help us to do that more easily. That's it for this video. Hope you guys enjoyed it, and I will see you next week.